uncovered correlations between tattoos and higher scores on measures of aggression. This is not necessarily physical violence, but rather a propensity for verbal confrontational behavior, a quickness to anger, and a resistance to authority or perceived control. The sanctuary versus the battleground. Initially, this can be misread as passion, strength, and a take-no-crap attitude, a woman who stands her ground. However, over time, a relationship must function from the conflicts of the world. If her default setting is confrontational, the home becomes another arena for combat. Conflict escalation, minor disagreements cannot be discussed calmly, they escalate into major arguments quickly. There is a low threshold for frustration and a tendency to perceive neutral statements as inability to de-escalate. The fight itself can become a source of passion and intensity, creating a dysfunctional cycle. The skills of apology, compromise, and gentle repair are often absent. Boundary testing, agree suggestions or challenges to her autonomy rather than frameworks for mutual security. What was once exciting strength becomes exhausting aggression. Respect erodes under a constant barrage of conflict, and love cannot grow in such inhospitable soil. The core question, is her strength rooted in emotional resilience and integrity, or is it a hair-trigger defensiveness that will turn our home into a battleground? Risk 6, the ideology of nonconformity, rebelling against the framework. The allure of the rebel, tattoo culture is inherently rooted in nonconformity and a rejection of traditional norms. This rebellious streak is often what makes a tattooed woman so compelling, she appears bold, fearless, and utterly authentic. The architecture of partnership is a conformity. A successful long-term partnership or marriage, however, institution there is compromise, sacrifice, routine, and stability, the very structures that the rebellious spirit often defines itself against. Resistance to commitment, the idea of forever, can feel suffocating, like a loss of freedom and identity. Resistance to compromise, meeting in the middle can be viewed as selling out or diluting one's authentic self. Resistance to routine, the healthy, predictable patterns that create security and trust are dismissed as boring and soul-crushing. This wiring is fundamentally at odds with the patient, often mundane work of building a life together. You may find yourself constantly trying to settle down with a partner whose core identity is constructed around resisting being settled. The synthesis, the perfect storm. These risks are not isolated, they are synergistic, creating a perfect psychological storm. Impulsivity leads to poor decisions. Unresolved trauma creates emotional chaos that impulsivity acts upon. Attention-seeking undermines trust and monogamy, providing outlets for impulsivity. Sensation-seeking sabotages the stability required to heal from trauma. Aggression destroys the safe space required for peaceful connection. Nonconformity rejects the relational frameworks that contain and manage all these traits. This interconnected cluster is why sociological data can point to lower relationship stability and higher divorce rates among heavily tattooed individuals. The ink is not the cause, it is a visible marker, a signal flag for a constellation of psychological traits that make the long-term, stable investment of a partnership profoundly challenging. Conclusion, the path of discernment, not prejudice. This analysis must end with a crucial disclaimer: correlation is not causation. Deeply self-aware, emotionally intelligent, and stable women with tattoos. They get ink as pure art, as meaningful milestones, or simply as a personal preference without any of the underlying risks discussed. Psychology deals in patterns and probabilities, not certainties. The ultimate message is not to avoid tattooed women. It is to practice profound discernment. See the ink not as a simple decoration, but as one piece of a much larger psychological puzzle. It is a signal that warrants calm curiosity. Before diving into the whirlwind, use these questions as a guide. Is her spontaneity a charming occasional event, or is it a systemic lack of self-control that manifests with money, emotions, and loyalty? Is her intense passion true intimacy, or is it the volatility of unhealed trauma? Is she actively healing, or is she using her past to justify present chaos? Is her confidence authentic and internal, or is it a performance reliant on external validation? Does she seek your eyes, or the rooms? Is her adventurous spirit compatible with long-term monogamy, or is she wired to eventually chafe against the stability I crave? Is her strength a calm, resilient power, or an equip into a power struggle? Does her rebellious nature have a place in a structured partnership, or does she define herself in opposition to the very compromise and commitment a relationship requires? Men are often hurt not because women hide who they are, but because they ignore the evidence that is plainly written on the skin, demonstrated in behavior, and echoed in life patterns. Attraction is biological and often immediate. Compatibility, however, is psychological and revealed over time. Choose not just with your eyes, but with your discernment. The attraction to a heavily tattooed woman is often immediate and powerful. It's a visual narrative of boldness, artistry, and a life lived outside the lines. This analysis isn't about judging art or personal style, it's a forensic look at the potential psychological underpinnings of a permanent decision. What patterns, correlations, and potential risks a man might be signing up for. The intersection of psychology, sociology, and clinical research points to a complex web of interconnected traits that extend far beyond the skin's surface. Risk 1, the neurology of impulsivity, when spontaneity becomes systemic. The allure, the initial research is compelling. There is a documented correlation between tattoo acquisition and higher scores on measures of impulsivity and sensation seeking. In the romantic arena, this is frequently packaged as intoxicating spontaneity. She is the woman who impulsively books a weekend getaway, says yes to every adventure, and lives with a captivating intensity that makes the ordinary world feel dull in comparison. This energy is magnetic because free from the shackles of overplanning and caution. The non-compartmentalized mind. The critical error is to believe this trait exists in a vacuum. Impulsivity is a neurocognitive pattern, a tendency to prioritize immediate reward over long-term consequence, driven by a strongly weaker influence from the prefrontal cortex. The same neural circuitry that bypasses the "what will I think of this in 20 years" question to get a permanent tattoo is the same circuitry activated in other high-stakes domains. Financial decision-making, this can financial goals. Major purchases are made without consultation, credit is leveraged for fleeting desires, and the concept of a financial safety net feels stifling. The partner often becomes the de facto accountant or the one who bears the emotional and financial burden of instability. Emotional regulation, relationships require patience and measured responses. An impulsive temperament struggles with this. A minor slight can trigger a disproportionately intense, drama-filled reconciliation. This creates an addictive cycle of conflict and makeup that is often mistaken for passion but is, in fact, emotional volatility. Fidelity and commitment, when the intense novelty of the relationship, the limerence phase, inevitably fades, the impulsive mind is primed to seek the next dopamine hit. The immediate thrill of validation from a new source can easily override the long-term value of a committed partnership. The decision-making process is the same. Immediate gratification over delayed reward. A tattoo is a permanent decision often made in a transient emotional state, a celebration, a moment of profound sadness. This pattern, living for the now, at the expense of the later, instability, but it significantly raises the statistical probability of and delayed gratification are ongoing challenges. The core question, when you see the ink, added collection of art, or is it a potential biomarker of an impulsive psychology that will inevitably permeate your shared financial future, your emotional security, and the sanctity of your commitment? Risk 2, the shadow of trauma, when art is armor. The narrative of reclamation, this requires immense empathy. A substantial body of clinical work links with histories of anxiety, depression, self-harm, and trauma. For many, the tattoo needle is not a tool of decoration but an instrument of reclamation. It's a ritual to take ownership of a body that has felt violated, to mark a survival anniversary, to transform a site of pain into a site of power. A phoenix, a semicolon, a beautiful quote over a scar, these are powerful symbols of the unresolved wound. The potential risk for a partner lies not in the past trauma itself, but in its present-day unresolved state. If the wounds that inspired the tattoos are still open, you are not just dating the woman, you are conscripting yourself into her ongoing internal war. Unhealed trauma is not a static event, it is an active, volatile force that manifests through complex psychological adaptations. Unpredictable attachment styles. She may exhibit a disorganized or anxious preoccupied attachment style. This looks like intense closeness followed by sudden, cold withdrawal, a deep fear of abandonment coupled with behaviors that push you away, a tendency to test your love by creating crises. This push-pull dynamic is exhausting and confusing. Emotional flashbacks and triggers. A seemingly innocuous word or situation can trigger a disproportionate emotional response moment. You find yourself navigating a minefield where you are often blamed for explosions you didn't plant. Cycles of self-sabotage. There can be an unconscious drive to prove deeply held negative self-beliefs. I am unlovable, I will be abandoned, true. This may manifest as picking fights, creating drama, or undermining the relationships too. Men often mistake this darkness for depth and this volatility for passion. But intensity is not intimacy,